Notice is hereby given of the regular meeting of the Board of Education of the Town of Westfield in the County of Union, New Jersey at 8 p.m. on the evening of Tuesday, March 20th, 2012, in the boardroom of the Administration Building, 302 Elm Street, Westfield, New Jersey. The purpose of the meeting is to transact the regular business of the Board and to transact any other business that may properly come before the Board. This is to advise the general public and to instruct that it be recorded in the minutes that in compliance with Chapter 231 of the Public Laws of 1975, entitled the Open Public Meetings Act, the Westfield School Board on Friday, March 16, 2012, caused to be posted at the office of the Board of Education, located at 302 Elm Street, Westfield, New Jersey, and delivered to the Westfield Leader, the Star-Ledger, the Westfield Library, Town Clerk of Westfield, Alternative Press, and Patch.com, a meeting notice setting forth the time, date, and location of the meeting. Vince, could you do a roll call?
Mr. Matesic?
Here.
Mr. Finn? Ms. Carey?
Here.
Mrs. Clancy?
Here.
Mr. Friedman?
Yes.
Ms.
Here.
Kerstad?
Yes.
Mrs. Lights?
Yes.
Mr. Slater?
Yes.
Mrs. Olrich?
Here.
Gene.
Everybody please stand, join us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Announcements? Mitch, start on your end. Anything?
Yep, from the Westfield High School. We have been notified that the following Westfield High School students earned a perfect score of 800 on the SAT or SAT-2 subject test taken this winter in December and January. Edmund Hahn earned an 800 in math. Alexander Jeffrey for reading. Rohit Segal for math. Robert Cassie for math and writing. Paul Lee for reading. And Alex Ying for reading. Congratulations to these students for such outstanding achievements.
I have a reminder that on March 30th, the date is the deadline for nominations for the 20th Annual Charles Philhauer Fellowship Award, designated for a full-time elementary teacher in the Westfield Public Schools. Letters of nomination are invited from interested citizens, students, Westfield Public School staff members, and should be addressed to Charles Philhauer Fellowship Committee of the Westfield Rotary Club, care of the Office of the Superintendent of Schools, 302 Elm Street, Westfield, New Jersey, 07090, or emailed to, one word, Rotary Philhauer at westfieldnjk12.org. More information available on the district website, and this is the brochure that you may also pick up from schools or the board office. It tells a little bit about the award, and it gives all the information for submitting the application. So we hope that you will take the time to recognize some of your most favored and capable teachers, and we look forward to recognizing the award choice.
Good. Question?
Yes. From Edison Intermediate, Albert Chen, an 8th grader at Edison, has qualified for the state level of the National Geographic Bee. This year's New Jersey State Bee is on Friday, March 30th at Rowan University in Glassboro. We wish Albert much success and congratulate him on his wonderful achievement.
Today was an especially exciting day at Westfield High School. Classroom Close-Up, NJ, arrived with a camera crew to film a story on Project 79. An 11-time Emmy-winning show, Classroom Close-Up is a production of the NJEA and highlights innovative teaching in public school classrooms. The episode featuring Project 79 will air on September 16th and October 21st at 6:30 a.m., 12:30 p.m., and 7:30 p.m., and on September 22nd and October 27th at 5:30 a.m. We will remind you of these dates and times again in the fall.
This weekend, Roosevelt Intermediate School students will perform Peter Pan, the classical musical for children of all ages. See Peter Pan soar through the air on Friday and Saturday, March 23rd and 24th at 7:30 p.m. and on Sunday, March 25th at 2 p.m. Tickets are $10 at the door and $8 in advance.
All right, the next Board of Education meeting will be held Tuesday, March 27th at 302 Elm Street. It will include the public hearing on the budget. The board will need to approve a budget to submit to the interim executive county superintendent.
And I'd like to announce that since today is the first day of spring, the Westfield Public Schools are referring to this week and celebrating this week as Spring Into Technology Week. And during this week, and for several weeks to come, we're welcoming everyone to take a peek at what actually our teachers and our students are doing with technology in the classrooms. In order to give you that peek, we've developed a number of videos showing our students and teachers in various subject areas, students from elementary level, intermediate, and high school, and showing you just how technology is used in a social studies class, in science, in a music class, and a whole variety of classes. So in order to do this, you can go to our website, www.westfieldnjk12.org/video. You can also tune into Westfield High School TV 36. The TV schedule is Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays at 11:30 and 6, and Sundays at 2. Now, we may even be able to catch a glimpse of one of these videos now. It is possible, so we'll see if that works.
See if the technology works.
My name is Victor Alfonso. I teach 5th grade elementary at Tamaulipas. We had started investigating Jamestown, and what we wanted to do was to move beyond the basic facts that you can find in a textbook and really kind of explore and investigate what life was truly like during that time period in 1607. The way the lesson was formatted using the laptops, we essentially had 3 different missions that we needed to accomplish. The first mission, what you needed to do was you became the people that were in charge of Jamestown in 1607. So you had to figure out all those difficult decisions that basically either decided life or death for your 100 and so colonists. And in the second mission, you walked in the footsteps of John Smith. Everything that he did, the challenges that he faced, those were all things that you were able now to do. And the third mission was a virtual tour and a virtual investigation of the actual fort. So you got to see what the buildings were like, what kind of jobs are there. We do discussion in class, but I think what's nice about being able to use the webpage and that piece of the technology as part of a closure to a lesson, it provides 2 other things for the students. Number one, it shows them that their voice is important. And at an elementary level, that's really critical. Secondly, having the message board right there with everyone posting kind of what they've learned, now they also very easily can see what everybody else has said. Traditionally, using textbooks and a lecture-based model, you're not fully reaching all your learners. You're not fully engaging all your learners. Being able to have the smart board available and the laptops available, what you are basically doing then is you're making history come to life. You're making it exciting, fun, engaging, so that you can see the students all of a sudden getting more of an interest in what is happening and really kind of becoming part of that time period and learning through experience. The first thing we have to understand is, education-wise, we need to make a push, because there's a whole initiative for the 21st century learning. When we're looking at how the world has changed, I think one of the challenges in the classroom is I can't prepare my students for the world that I know and the world that I grew up in. Really what I'm trying to do is prepare the students for the world that's yet to come. So obviously in the digital learning technological world that we're in right now, they need constant immersion, not only into the basic education that we've always had, critical thinking skills and things like that, but now they need that technology piece too, because that's the world they're growing up in. So for a teacher, I kind of feel like it's my duty to try to put in as much technology as possible, but at the same time, what we want to do is take advantage of what can the technology provide for us. But ultimately, it's just an open mind. There's so many new things at our fingertips that if we just keep our minds open and willing to take some of those risks and try new things out, that's when special things happen. And that's really what we want to do. We want to use technology to make special things happen in the classroom.
So we'd certainly like to thank the students and the teacher. It's 5th grade at Tamaulipas School. But again, there are 10 other videos similar to that with different classes, different levels of students, and we hope that you have a moment to take a look at those on our website or on the television. also like to thank Jay Ruggiero, who helped get all the videos ready for viewing. And again, I think it's a worthwhile look at what our students are doing, what our teachers are accomplishing as well.
All right. I'd then recognize the public for agenda items only. Seeing no one come to the podium, we'll move to the superintendent reports.
All right, and we continue our discussions on budget. We certainly have had a number already. Some of the topics already discussed include maintenance and facilities, include athletics, transportation, and technology certainly has been a focus at this table as well. And tonight, I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Yaniro, who is going to focus first on salaries and benefits, and also special education will be another topic.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we're discussing salaries and benefits first, as related to the 2012-2013 budget. First, I thought I would go over our staff in the district. And the staff, of course, serving our 6,335 pupils, 5.5 kindergarten teachers, 153 grades 1 to 5 teachers, 98 grades 6 to 8 teachers. This includes an additional half-time teacher at Edison for additional computer and technology support. 119 high school teachers. This includes 2 additional high school teachers related to enrollment. 94.5 special education teachers, 6.7 technology staff. The budget also includes additional staff support for our technology staff that is not noted in these numbers at this time. 19 guidance counselors. This includes an additional guidance counselor at the high school and additional guidance support at the elementary level. 16 child study team members, 7 supervisors, 22.5 administrators, 11 librarians, 14.5 nurses, 59 secretaries. This includes additional part-time support in the payroll department as a result of new state regulations regarding pension and benefits. 43 custodians, 11 maintenance and grounds workers, 93.5 paraprofessionals. These are primarily special education and classroom aides. That's our staff picture. Looking at benefits. First is health benefits. Almost all of our full-time employees receive health benefits through the Board of Education. This is also the second year of our employees having to contribute 1.5% of their salary to help offset these costs. Some of the contracts also call for additional contributions. The new law will phase in a percentage of premiums that employees must pay or pay the 1.5% of salary, whichever is greater. The estimate for the total contribution by staff next year is $868,000. The health benefits costs have decreased due to the contributions by employees and the fact that benefits have decreased as a result of contract negotiations. Social Security and pension. These are the employer contributions, mostly for support staff. The biggest part is custodians and secretaries and paraprofessionals. This covers the employer share of the Social Security payments, and the state pays the employer share for teachers and administrators. Now, all of the support staff, as well as teachers and administrators, pay a percentage of their salary as the employee share for Social Security and pension. Unemployment insurance. Employees have a salary deduction to cover the cost of benefits for employees who are out of work. Also, the board contributes an amount to fund this expense. Workers' compensation. By law, boards must carry workers' compensation insurance in the event employees are injured on the job. Looking at the total budget for salaries and benefits in 2011, 2012 this year, $70,078,197. Proposed budget for next year is $70,576,193. That represents 74% of the total budget. The increase is almost $500,000, or less than 1% increase. Next topic I'd like to look at is our special education program, special services. Our special services program, the number of pupils classified is 1,191 out of our total population of 6,335 pupils. This represents a 18.8% of our total population, which is about average for districts in our socioeconomic status. Looking at dollars here in a portion of our budget, out of district tuition. This is for pupils we send out of district to special education, private schools or public schools, for those pupils we cannot accommodate in district. Related services, these are contracted services for speech, occupational and physical therapy, and psychologists. We are looking into the possibility of hiring some staff to help offset these costs wherever cost effective. In district classroom supplies, $24,000. Extended school year program, we do have an extended year program for in-district pupils during the summer, for pupils who are in need of more than 10 months of services. So that total, that portion is a little over $9 million. Looking at some of the specific programs in our school. First, the preschool kindergarten programs at Lincoln School. We have a number of teachers. We have 2 preschool teachers representing 4 sections. This is a half-day program. We have 32 special education pupils in this program and 12 non-special education pupils who pay tuition. 3 teachers for Leaps and Bounds. This is an enhanced program for 3 and 4 years old. We also receive 1 pupil from out of district in this program on a tuition basis, and we receive 3 other special education pupils from other school districts, also on a tuition basis for other aspects of our special education program. We also have a teacher for a transitional kindergarten program for our special education pupils as a transition to first grade, and you'll see the number of paras represents paraprofessionals or aides, and the number of students in each class section. We also have a number of self-contained programs in the district. 2 Leaps and Bounds programs with 6 paraprofessionals, 11 students at Wilson. 2 LLD, this is learning language disabled classes, 2 teachers, 5 paraprofessionals, 23 students at McKinley. 2 LLD at Tamaulipas, 5 paraprofessionals and 25 students. Total 16 paraprofessionals and 59 students and 6 teachers. We also have resource room programs. This is extra support for pupils who are not contained in special education classes. As you can see, we have resource room programs at each level. Lincoln Kindergarten, the elementary level, intermediate, Edison and Roosevelt at the high school. So we have a total of 806 pupils who receive this additional help as needed during the school day. We also have a few resource room specialized programs. These are more enhanced specialized resource room programs. As you can see, we have 1 at Edison, 2 at the high school, and a total of 53 pupils who take advantage of this program. Our related services personnel, this represents our child study team, our school psychologists, learning consultants, social workers, speech and language, one teacher of the deaf, occupational therapist, a physical therapist, and adaptive physical education. Looking at the funding for our special education program, the total cost of the program is $21,617,000. That includes all expenses of our program, out-of-district placements, in-district education, all of the salaries and benefits for all of our staff related to special education. As you can see, we break it into three parts. The federal grant is $1,479,000. State aid and tuition received. The majority of the state aid we received is for special education. Included in this number is $1 million for extraordinary expenses for special education and some of the tuition that we receive from out-of-district pupils. That totals $3,678,000. So that the total that we receive in outside aid, federal and state, represents about 22% of our budget. The remainder, of course, is funded by the school district. Looking at a comparison between the total special services budget this year and next, this year it's $20,856,000. Proposed is $21,617,000. That's an increase of $760,000. Most of that is out-of-district special education tuition. That amount, the budget is 22.7% of our total budget. That's the total.
All right. Comments, questions? Gina?
I have nothing to compare this to.
Meaning what?
How am I expected to analyze this based on the fact that I don't know what we're paying this year? And I don't know how reasonable the changes are or where they are. Did the Finance Committee look at that?
Right, that was part of the budget presented to the Finance Committee.
Yeah. It was also, when we did our initial presentation, I guess we showed the overall increases. Right.
So, but you have the 11-12 versus
Sal-
the 12-13.
Right.
Where's that?
Salaries and benefits, you have
So last page.
prior year, you have current year budget and next year's budget.
Yeah, but I don't have categories. Program categories. Okay.
Salaries and benefits?
Well, for example, I thought I was listening to, first of all, a current listing of our staff, but in fact I was listening to a projection of staff needs. So what did I hear where we were adding? We're adding a half of a kindergarten teacher, I believe, one section?
No.
Not kindergarten, no.
But don't we now
Yeah.
have 5 people?
Our anticipated kindergarten, we don't have an anticipated
No.
addition there. We do at the intermediate level, we do at the...
Although now we have 5 a.m. and 5 p.m.
Right.
So this says 5.5.
Okay.
Okay.
5.5 kindergarten teachers. All right, we don't have an anticipated addition of a half kindergarten teacher, so I couldn't tell you where the .5 is right now. It may come to me any minute now, but it's not in my head right now.
Okay.
The additions are, I think Vince mentioned the intermediate.
It's, yeah,
We have a counselor at
halftime
the
at the
intermediate and a counselor at the
intermediate
high school.
at Edison for tech and computers.
Right.
2 teachers at the high school.
Okay.
1 guidance counselor at the high school. And there's some additional support for elementary guidance. And there's some additional support for our tech staff, but that isn't included in the numbers at this time.
All right, well, it's very hard to track this against current to see where things are changing or where trends are if we don't have a comparative year-over-year analysis of this information.
Right, so only the summary for the salaries and benefits was done with a comparative, but for example, you don't have a next to each other listing of the number of staff in each position.
Yeah, more detail was provided to the finance committee.
All right, well, that's, unless we receive that offline, you know, it's not helpful to those of us who don't sit on finance if we're looking to understand that, to increase our knowledge.
All right, so help us. So we gave you the dollar increase, and we told you where the personnel are increasing. So what's next?
Okay, so I didn't know I had to listen to that as I was listening.
Okay.
Okay, so the, so
I don't know
the,
what to do with that.
well, the information wasn't delivered to me from the start that said, I'm going to tell you exactly how many staff we're planning, and I'm additionally going to tell you where my changes are from this year. So if I knew that, that's my cue to listen and jot down where the differences are. If I'm not listening for differences, I'm not going to know to understand that I'm hearing a difference,
All
that's
right.
all.
So I think we're giving the information. We could probably do better at putting it on the paper.
I thought so.
Yeah, I think, right, it just took me a minute to.
I didn't get what I was
to
hearing.
understand that I was hearing projected rather than current.
I
think
heard
that's all.
current, and then I thought I was listening to a current understanding of what my staff looks like at the moment, and then I realized current actually meant budget current.
I got it.
Right, it's all related to the 2012, 2013 budget.
All right.
So Vince, I think all the information's here. I
Right.
think for next week's presentation, which is the final presentation.
Yeah,
Let's
okay.
just put it in more detail on the
Right.
pages.
Okay.
Maybe we could recap the addition. 2 high school
Right.
teachers.
Yes, wait.
Right, but now I have to
I'm
listen.
gonna let Dr. Dolan do it. Thought that would be,
Because I'm not sure I had it
I
right.
thought that would be helpful.
Right, 2 high school positions, 1 high school counselor. At the intermediate level, additional half-time computer education and also technology education. At the elementary level, additional counseling support. That does not mean another full-time counselor, but where it is required, there'll be some additional support. Mr. Uniro, what else am I forgetting?
Well, there's technology staff.
And the additional support for
staff,
technology.
which we haven't,
Right, for the
strict-
technology
identified
initiative,
yet, right.
which we've said we're looking at a little differently than we have in the past, so we haven't determined exactly how that will look yet. But we will have additional support for technology, exactly, yeah.
Was there someone in special ed? Said something?
You're right that we're looking at, for example, some of our related services. As Dr. Weissman has been analyzing the cost of our related services, we are seriously looking at hiring a few additional staff, which will take the place of some of our contracted services because of the high cost. And so that actually wouldn't be indicated on here yet. It's not going to be more money. It is just going to be providing services in a different manner. But it is very likely that that'll be the case for next year, yes.
Okay, now moving on to special services.
Oh, hang on.
Yes, sorry.
So all of the elementary schools are remaining the same in the amount of classroom teachers needed.
Yes, overall. The tricky thing about that is just, students go up to the next grade. So in general, assuming we're not going to have a major influx in one grade in one school or a major, 8 students move out of one grade in one school. In general, if a given grade, let's say grade 2 has 3 sections, in almost every incident, then it will be 3 next year unless people move in or out of that grade. So yes, those assumptions are the same. And as always, we monitor, we have projections for elementary, and then we monitor it because there are always people who end up moving in and out. Some we know it happens more in the lower grades in 1st and 2nd grade, so we always look for that. But we have money in the budget that can cover those, projecting what we know from the past, yes.
And was there any discussion for Franklin's 4th grade moving up to be split to add additional section?
I would say that's one on a watch list, just as you have, there are a few watch list ones, and then you just
So
see.
those are still on the watch list, so
Yes.
it's not because that class has been moving up through the grades very, very large.
Right.
With 6 sections at 24 or 25 kids every year except second grade. But,
Right.
so I'm just hoping that's still on the radar.
Right, and again, elementary is
Yes.
just a little bit, it's just different than the other 2 levels. So they absolutely have to be watched, and you see where your surprises are for elementary over the summer. But this is, the principals are already emailing and calling me and saying, I think these 2 are moving out, but we may have this one coming in, and it's too soon for all definites, but they're already looking.
So in years past, when we knew there were hotspots, I mean, finance did not touch on enrollment really at the elementary school. You have budgeted, kept kind of 2 teachers in your back pocket. Are we doing that this year? So if 8 kids do move into the class that Roseanne is referencing, will we have money to hire a teacher?
We certainly at least have 1. And I believe we're going to have fewer, because if you remember the last few years, we really had to push up our class size, and we knew we had a lot of hotspots.
Right.
And we were just trying to address the most difficult ones. That's not our situation this year. But we're likely to have some movement. Both, we could have some down and we could have some up. So there is at least 1 in the budget. So should that be the case, we have an option.
I think it's also worth noting regarding the guidance counselor in the high school that we're also including additional funds for the guidance department in order to help with the college process, to visit schools a little bit more and just give them more flexibility to better, to continue preparing, what they need
You're
to
absolutely
know
right.
for the schools.
Absolutely right.
But
Yes.
is that money included in the salaries and benefits document? No.
Salaries and benefits.
Right.
No, I'm sorry,
Right,
it's
yes.
separate from that, but I just wanted to make
Okay.
sure that that's
Right.
noted, yeah.
Well, can I just ask a point of clarification? Under the staff budget, this 94.5 special education teachers, that portion of the salary and benefits attributable to them is also in the operating budget
In the
under the
very
special
total,
education,
correct.
right? So, okay.
Are we ready to move on?
Oh,
To special ed? Yes, okay. Special services. I have 2 points of historic reference. My understanding is that, well, first of all, do we know what the state average percent of total pupil population is?
I believe Dr. Weissman was going to.
Oh, Dr. Weiss.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you? But the state average is about 15.5%. That's comparing all 600, roughly 600 school
Okay.
districts in New Jersey.
This district trended around 17.5% for what I can remember. Is this moving up to 18.8? Is this new? How can you help me understand where we've been in the last few years? Because I don't have comparative data.
That number can change based on enrollment at any given point. So I'd say the 18%, 18.8% that it is now can go up or down significantly depending on how many students move in, how many move out at a given point. So I would say that's a relatively stable. We're off by about a percentage or so.
So that doesn't concern you particularly?
I think we'd all like to be, I think all districts would like to be at that state average, would like to be around 15.5%. But it varies from district to district. When you compare us to like districts, meaning districts of similar DFG and size, we are actually probably lower in terms of our population, in terms of our classification rate. So I'd say we're still good. I think it's something we always look at. So we look for trends to make sure that we're not overclassifying, and we try to work with general education to provide services to try to contain that number. But it's been relatively stable, I would say.
And then looking at the last page at the budget comparison, special services budget, 22.7% of the total budget. I know that we haven't done program budgets in a number of years, but my latest recollection is that we were at about 21% of our budget for a number of years. Can you tell me what you know about how our budget percentage has been trending in special ed? Have you looked back over time to see how we're holding the line or how that cost has been increasing?
I haven't done a historical study, but.
Right, last year was around 21.5%. I don't know what it was in previous years.
Yeah, that's about what I remember. So it's up about 1%.
It could be trending upward,
A lot of that is special education
the
tuition,
tuition.
which
I know exactly what it is.
increases quite a bit.
Just wants
And
to be
actually,
aware of it.
actually, we've held the line with our out-of-district rate.
Yeah.
We're still hovering around 8%, which is good. So-
Yeah.
And we continue to build capacity with adding programs.
Yeah, I just think it's really important to note that that is a very large piece of budget cost for us, and that, and I know we work very hard to manage it very carefully, so I thank you for that part of it. And it still is big.
And I think one of the ways we're going to try to contain some costs, I think
Look at related costs.
the related services
Right.
costs have really increased exponentially the last couple
Right.
of years. And by bringing staff on, we can help save some costs there.
And what's the likelihood that, in what order are you hoping your priority hires are?
Occupational therapists and behaviorists,
Yeah,
yeah.
behaviorists for sure.
absolutely. Yeah,
They're very high number, salary numbers and out-of-pocket costs.
yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, are the costs associated with defending lawsuits brought against the district part of our operating budget for this, under this?
No,
No, that's a
no,
whole big.
Another-
that's a separate budget for legal, right?
Can somebody help me, tell me if I'm looking at this correctly? If you look at the operating budget, our operating budget for special services, if you don't count the federal money that we get and the state money that we get, it's, if we just use our operating budget, it's very much in line with the percentage of our special ed population. So our operating budget of if special ed, the operating budget is 16,458,000, that's about 18% of our budget. So the state does sort of, the funding we get from the state and the federal government levels out in some ways our spending. So we're not spending 5% more from the operating budget on special ed students because we get that aid from the federal government and the state. Is that a?
That's a good way to look
I'm not
at
so
it.
sure that's more than it's just
No, I
a
mean,
coincidence.
Right? Well, I don't think it's, well, it might be a coincidence, but it,
It adds up.
Yes, it could be. Yeah, it does.
And if we didn't get the money in state aid, we would have to take it out of the operating
Yeah,
budget.
sure.
Yes, okay.
But we also provide services based on it.
Is that true?
Yes.
Based on how much money we get, we decide the service?
More that we certainly have a lot of federal and state regulations that come along with receiving funds. I'm not sure if that was the
Right.
point, but yeah.
Okay. But the service is decided by the child's IEP, and then we go about funding it, right?
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Anyone else? All right. Thank you. I'd ask the board to approve the minutes of the board meeting held on March 6, 2012, and private minutes of March 6, 2012. All those in favor? Second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No opposed. No abstentions. Personnel. Jane.
Okay, I would like to make a motion to ask for the board's approval of personnel items number 1 through 12.
Second?
Second.
Sorry, I'm drinking.
Questions, comments?
Good.
Good?
Mrs. Clancy?
Yes.
Mr. Friedman?
Yes.
Mr. Matesic?
Yes.
Ms. Carey?
Yes.
Ms. Kerstad?
Yes.
Mrs. Lights?
Yes.
Mr. Slater?
Yes.
Mrs. Overy?
Yes.
Facilities. Jean,
Back to me.
back to you.
Okay, facilities does have a review and an update for the board and also for the public this evening. At our last two board meetings, we have heard a district-wide roof assessment from architect George Duthie. I thought that before we have a discussion tonight regarding his findings, that it would be helpful for facilities to provide a quick recap and review of what led to his assessment and then what we have learned through his assessment. About a year and a half ago, the Facilities Committee held a discussion about the conditions of our roofs. Most of our roofs were aging beyond their life expectancy, and while our maintenance staff has been trying their best to Band-Aid and repair problem areas, we knew that it was time to look at the big picture. This is when we explored, as we've talked about, the option of solar. Finding a solar investment firm to pay for new roofs and put on solar panels would not only help to solve our roof replacement needs, it could also help to provide further energy savings to the district. And unfortunately, as we have heard, we were unable to find a vendor due to the old age and poor conditions of so many of our roofs. Another reason that we looked at solar was that we knew that the cost for the roof replacement would fall outside of our yearly budget planning. In the past, years ago, a school district could have a fund balance, which is similar to a savings account. That would cover major capital improvement projects such as roof replacements. The state imposed a cap on this fund several years ago, taking away districts' ability to save for such projects. School districts now must work within a 2% budget cap, also preventing us from budgeting for large projects. 3 years ago, our state aid was reduced from 5% of our budget to 1%, causing a significant impact on staffing and leaving very little room for the maintenance budget. Although we have seen an increase in aid over the last 2 years, it is not significant enough to address the needs of our roofs. In fact, this year alone, without considering replacement, the cost to, quote from the architect, merely chase the leaks would be close to $1 million for repairs. So while we try to be creative in finding outside resources through solar, it cannot be considered until the roof work is first completed. One thing that I think is important to understand is that our need for roof replacement has come to a head not because it has been ignored, but because districts can no longer save for large capital improvements such as roof replacement. Because we have had to make choices over the last several years between staffing, programs, and facility needs, and because the fact of the matter is many of the roof's warranties have expired at the same time. We have kept them going beyond their useful lives, and it is time to address the roof work district-wide. So after learning that our roofs were not solar ready, we requested to have an in-depth assessment, and this is what the investigation found. Every one of our 12 buildings has an existing leak. 10 schools, the administration building, and Kaler Fieldhouse needs whole or partial roof replacement. In total, approximately 80% of the square footage of our buildings' roofs need replacement. Due to many of the roofs being beyond their life expectancy, not only are they failing on the outside, but damage is occurring on the inside of these buildings as well. Even small leaks can cause large problems, and we are only seeing the number of problems increasing as time goes by. To continue to spend money on patching the problem areas is short-sighted. We need new roofs. Spending money on repairing the old ones does not meet the need for replacement. In order to have truly safe and sound facilities, we need to fix the problem with a long-term solution. We also learned through the assessment process that it's a good time to look at considering a long-term payment approach because at this time, interest rates are at an all-time low, and as we also heard from Mr. Duthie, the construction costs are currently favorable. A bond referendum to replace our roofs would provide with a minimum of 20 years of roof life on almost all of our buildings. In addition, moving forward after the roof work, the district would see savings from energy efficiency, which we also talked a bit about, due to better roof insulation, and open up the possibility to again explore the solar with vendors as an alternative energy option. We also heard from Mr. Duthie in order to seek a bond referendum in time to have the roof work accomplished in the summer of 2013, we would need to approve a resolution on March 27th to hold a bond referendum on September 24th. So it's been a lot of considerable amount of information to digest and to review, and hopefully this will at least give us a starting point for our discussion.
Good summary.
Yeah, very good.
Questions or comments on the roofs? We need them.
Yeah, I mean, I think from the presentation and the information we have, it wouldn't be prudent to wait, and I think that we should float a bond.
Right, for a lot of reasons. Interest rates in the last few weeks have slowly been going up, and the sooner that we can do this and lock in rates at the 3% level, I think is very prudent, because I think within 6 to 9 months that, every 25 basis points on that size bond is very significant. So that's why I think it's really great that we're doing this now rather than later.
And Vince, one of the things you were going to look at is when the other bonds start to fade off.
Right, yes, I've been talking to our bond attorney and our auditor on that, and they've already given me some preliminary information that we're analyzing, and hopefully by the Finance Committee Thursday night, I'll have more information on that.
But what I took from your preliminary comments was that, in fact, there are in the near term.
Correct, and they are working around they call it wrapping around new debt service payments around our existing to minimize the tax impact.
So for next week's meeting, can we have a schedule of what it would look like over each of the, whatever the term?
Yes.
They're 20 years,
Right,
so.
right.
Okay.
Has there been any more information from the state of whether they're going to start helping districts again fund these large capital projects?
We have heard nothing, no rumors, either positive or negative.
Have we been asking?
Oh, absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. Our architect is on top of that, but
Right,
it's basically
okay.
a freeze on
I know.
those expenditures, and no mention in the new budget of those dollars.
And Vince, as I understand it, are there some construction projects have been put on hold? So there were schools that had applied for assistance from the state, is that correct? And those projects have been put on hold until something happens or a determination is made. So if that were the case, would those types of projects even receive priority over someone submitting a new project? I mean,
It's hard to say. In the last round of funding, they were put on a priority basis. In the old days, it was first come, first serve. And then what they started doing a couple of years ago is taking in all of the applications and putting them in different tiers, different priority tiers, which was smart, so that you didn't have, you had really needed projects like roof repairs and so on, as opposed to other projects that maybe weren't as critical. But it's hard to say what would happen when and if funds are released for a new program.
Because there was a time when a couple of years ago, I think some schools had started construction and lost funding because everything was put on hold.
Right, correct, right. So it's likely
Something like
that
that
it would
might
be
would
some
get a-
kind of a priority, in a priority basis, right? Because obviously there won't be enough money to satisfy all of the needs of
So
all
many
of the districts.
districts are in the same
Right.
position.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
The legislation committee will be meeting, I think we finally decided on the 29th. We had a hard time getting a date, but I think it's the 29th. And one of the things that we want to discuss is writing a letter to Senator Keene and Assemblyman Bramnick and Assemblywoman Munez to, ask, to put this on their radar screen, and, hopefully they can bring that back down to Trenton. So
is
we
there
are
not
going
a
to be
meeting?
proactive.
Good.
There's not a meeting this Tuesday?
There-
Legislature? Oh, okay.
I think it's the
Our committee.
I think it's
No,
the 29th.
It's the 29th.
First it was Tuesday.
And a week and
Okay.
We had a hard time getting a date.
Oh, there's also one on the 26th? We have
No.
two of them?
Just one.
Vince, we had asked our architect to go back and look at the timeline with a question as to whether or not we could do this in November rather than September. And my understanding is he came back with several reasons why we should maintain the September schedule. And the one that struck me the most was the potential impact on cost from the time, if I'm getting it correctly, the time of year that we could end up doing the work, and also the amount of time we'd have in the bidding process to allow people to put in bids.
Right.
Can you just speak to that?
Right. If we were to, by having a referendum in September, then all of his planning, his preparation of the plans and specifications and getting approval of the state and so on would enable the project to go out to bid probably in February, March at the very latest. And at that time, you certainly will get more favorable bids because all of the roof work throughout the state is done during the summer.
Right.
If the referendum were in November, that would push everything back and much later in the spring, at which time you'd have fewer contractors available and consequently higher prices.
Right.
And it's particularly critical in a project like ours, where we're probably going to need about 4 contractors, because there's an awful lot of roof work that has to be done in one summer. No one contractor or 2 contractors could do it. So the sooner we get out the bid, the more available contractors, consequently the better prices.
It will require more diligence on our part, though, in terms of getting the word out so soon after school starts for the new referendum. But I agree that it seemed from George's memo that the pros of having it in September outweighed any disadvantages.
So at next week's meeting, we would have a resolution to move forward with the bond? Would Mr. Duthie be here for questions?
Sure, absolutely. You can have that.
Is there any specific information the board feels it needs that it doesn't have at this time that we'd want to come?
I'm sorry, what?
Is there any specific information the board feels like it doesn't have at this time that would want to have next week?
I think the information about previous bonds would be helpful that
Right.
you had raised.
Right.
Okay.
Well, have we made a decision about the turf field?
Yeah.
I mean,
Why
that was
is there
raised,
silence
but
about the
are
So-
we-
field?
There's not silence. We're first talking about the roof.
Yeah, we're sort of getting,
I feel like we're done with that conversation, and you had part 2 of your presentation.
Oh, okay.
so I just was going to note that last week we also, facilities had met and raised the consideration of adding a turf field to the field, to the bond, to open that up for discussion. We talked about also coming out with a report about a year and a half ago regarding the conditions of our fields. And since it's also a large capital improvement project that we really haven't been able to look at funding through our budget, we thought it would be good to open up the discussion to see if that would be something that the board or the public would be interested in talking about.
Right, and to me, and I think this is how we talked about it last week in some sense, there are a lot of unknowns
Right.
about what to do. And we have a general sense from our prior study that Edison could be a good choice. There are other potential locations. And we talked about how a turf field could fit into Edison. And we have remaining questions as to whether or not we should do more, whether or not we should do it at all. And we don't even know if that's a suitable site. We think it is from a construction perspective and floodplain perspective. We'd have to look at soil samples and do other testing. From my perspective, we would need to have all of that information before we actually voted on moving forward with a turf field. So in comes the complexity. To preserve our flexibility to be able to have that vote prior to June, we wanted to consider putting in next week's vote what it would cost if we moved forward, right? So that we have the flexibility to do a study, consider whether we want a turf field, where best to put it, what the pros and cons are, and then, Vince, correct me if I'm wrong, anytime prior to the last week of June, we could take that component out of the bond referendum.
Correct.
And still move forward with the full project. So if I put that another way, if we don't approve it next week, that could mean we can't go forward.
It puts it in jeopardy.
Puts it in jeopardy. Right. So if our view was to maintain flexibility on this issue, we would want to put it in next week's vote.
Right.
And what would be the costs of the study?
$28,000. But I think that would be the full study. I think if at the beginning they're looking at more critical aspects, so that if they uncovered something that would significantly change the cost, they would let us know early on.
Can you just give a little bit more color of what would be in the study specifically that they'd look for?
It's mostly soils testing, possibility of wetland areas, the implications of the stream nearby.
Right.
You know, it's all DEP, Department of Environmental Protection issues, and you know, because they have to, you know, they would have to put the drainage system under the field, so they have to go fairly deep, and they have to test all the soil to make sure it's suitable. And you know, there might be sections where it has to be replaced, and that's costly. So it's a study that's required by law.
Thank you.
Would they just do the study at Edison, or would they do the study at the places that Rich just alluded to, that there were other options?
So the recommendation from 2010 was Edison. That doesn't preclude us from having a conversation as to whether there are more appropriate spots. And I mean, we can. How would you handle that? I mean,
I think, you know, if we decided that we would at least like to move forward with the flexibility, then it probably would be a good time for facilities to sit down and really work on some analysis of what we'd want to do. Would we want to go straight forward and look at the testing at Edison, or do we want to have that discussion?
certainly see what changed since that study was done.
Right.
Because we were pretty affirmative when we concluded that
Yep.
Edison was the appropriate spot. Almost 2 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Has anything changed?
Well, it's what we're
Right.
suggesting.
Okay.
Well, the land hasn't moved.
Well, usage maybe.
No, but usage, added detail from other sources, you know, users, new athletic director. Yeah, I mean, there's, you know.
Yeah.
Wait, so are you saying that we did a study already? And now we have to do a new study?
No.
Not a paid study looking, sampling each field. As a committee, we considered various locations. As a board, we discussed various locations and proposed in a public meeting Edison Field.
Right.
So that's what we're talking about. So before we just say, okay, well, last time we proposed in public Edison Field. Let's just go back and look at why we proposed that and make sure nothing changed.
But
There were no soil
paid
samples done last
study-
time.
Yeah, the paid study was not done.
Right,
Okay.
correct.
No
Right,
site
it
analysis
was more
done.
looking at, a lot of it was looking at sizes of fields. There's some places that may look wide open just because of where they're situated, but when, at that time, the actual measurements were taken, it was not a field that was an acceptable size. So it might not be a bad idea if we took the highlights of that study and reviewed them at a board meeting, just to say, we did look in this spot, and this is why it doesn't work, et cetera.
Right.
I don't think it would take that long, actually, so I think it would be...
Yes, so, but, I mean, my takeaway from all of the discussions was we are not going to be in any kind of position to make a recommendation in a week from now.
Right.
So we are in a position to preserve flexibility if we want to. Doesn't mean we have to, but if we want to, we can.
Just from a historical perspective, what happened 2 years ago? It sounds like the facilities committee considered it, that there was some public presentation of the possibility of Edison becoming a turf field, and then was it purely financial that the
Yes.
issue died?
Yes.
It wasn't public reaction, we didn't even get that far down the road.
Correct.
So
Not at all.
I think the cost last time was, or from the last presentation, that would be about $1.5 million.
Right.
And the only way that we could fund that is through a bond of some sort. And there's no danger in adding it to our proposal next week, or whatever we vote on next week, as long as we take it out by June if the study ends up showing that it's not. Am I right? Am I
Yep.
interpreting it
Yes.
all correctly?
Yep.
Okay.
But would we consider to, oh, sorry. Was
No,
that-
oh,
Would we
it's okay.
would you consider to increase flexibility? I mean, why was it suggested only to do the middle part of Edison Field and not the whole field? Because it looks like that, like the baseball field will be half turf and half grass.
Right.
I mean, I'm just looking at a picture that's.
No, you're right, you're
So-
right. That's absolutely right, and
So-
The
I don't have
JV
information for that.
That's the JV
Just from
field. The
the
varsity
picture.
field would not be impacted.
Yeah.
So
I don't know, there must have been conversation about this somewhere that the board doesn't really know about at the table.
No, I'm looking at a
No,
picture.
it's in.
This is from last week's.
Last week's picture,
Last
you
picture.
can just tell that it's only half,
Did we discuss
half
that?
of the outfield.
that's from the board meeting.
From last week's
Right.
presentation.
Presentation,
where-
right.
Right.
So we're just talking
That
about
may not have
public
been
information.
pointed out.
So I reached out to both Jane and to Rich, and to the point you just made, after seeing the picture, after hearing the presentation from the folks that came and talked about the field, and knowing that we want to try and preserve some flexibility, I did ask the question, this was before your head exploded, Rich, I think, whether or not we should consider what the option would be of doing the entire field, so that we would have, from what we saw in the public yesterday, you wouldn't just have the field, the turf field in the middle of the two baseball fields. You would have the entire back area of Edison, which would be turf. So both baseball fields would be turf, and then you'd have room for soccer or football or lacrosse or whatever else. And I don't think it's speaking out of school. I think what we heard in facilities was that cost could be $3.5 million. Right? Is that what you guys recall? So, not only do we have this discussion of, do we preserve some flexibility and include it in the bond discussion for next week? If we want to include it, what number do we put in there? Is it 1.5 for the middle field? Is it 3.5 or something else for the entire area? So, and the reason I started going in that direction was, playing baseball, I think it's a little weird, although the guy that builds the fields told us that they do it all the time. It seems a little weird to me to have half of a field with turf and half of it, grass.
Right.
And maybe the other thing to be thinking about is, how often are we going to go to the public for a bond issue? We know that there's lots of need for the fields, and I think we've got some good history, whether it be at Keller and at Sycamore and at Houlihan, to see the value of what those fields, having been turfed, have done for the community. They perform well, they keep up well. The maintenance, is obviously much reduced And we get a lot more usage out of it. There's a lot of games that just don't get canceled anymore because, you can play. I think it's safer than, what ultimately happens because we can't keep up with the field. So anyway, thinking a little bit grander, isn't something that we should consider.
And I wonder too if we could get maybe a little bit more of a definitive number. We had asked him the question regarding turfing the baseball field as well, and I think it was something that hadn't really been gone back and checked on. Maybe it isn't 3.5.
Yeah, we should probably get a number.
Might make sense too, for Jane, for the facilities committee to take a look at what was just approved in Springfield 2 weeks ago. They just approved turf field at my old high school, for the side of the high school now, a very, very large undertaking, which I believe is also going to include a new baseball field and not just the one they have on Mizell. So it just might make sense to take a look at that too, because they're in that process.
I'd like the facilities committee to look at whether or not it would be reasonable to provide lighting at Kaler and also at any new field that's turfed.
We started that discussion. We'll report back.
I wouldn't know that because it wasn't reported.
Well, we didn't exactly report every detail of every conversation, nor do you probably in all of the committees you run.
No, but topics are valuable to understand that conversations are being had.
Yeah, I think that would be an important part of the discussion to bring forward.
I know our architect's looking at the possibility of pushing back the JV field. There is room to move that back, which would minimize the turf versus real grass in the outfield.
Right, did he ever come back on that answer? Because we had
He
talked
hasn't
about
given us, he
pushing
hasn't
it.
given us a price on that yet.
I just have to say that every week we talk about the bond and it gets bigger and bigger. So now we're up, first it was 13.5, then it was 15, now it's 17. So are there other fields, like Tamaqua maybe, that would be smaller, that we could fit into the 15 million? I mean, I feel it's just growing and growing and growing. So if we're going to look at options, because you said there might be other options, maybe. I mean, I'm just afraid next week it'll be 20 million.
No.
Well, traditionally, when you build a turf field, you make it a regulation soccer-sized field, so that you can play soccer, field hockey, football, and so on. And you can reline lacrosse and so on. I mean, if you made a smaller field, that would obviously limit the amount of sports you could play on that. And a lot of the issue in terms of why it's Edison and not the other school is just size. I mean, we recently did look at the high school, and it doesn't fit. It's just too big for the high school field.
And just to be clear, the number of projects we're talking about bonding has in no way, shape, or form grown. In my mind, one definite project we have talked about all along are the roofs. I don't think that has changed. The additional project has been turf fields, and there's been no concrete decision made. In fact, other than we may decide we want to preserve flexibility. So I don't want to walk out of here thinking we've thrown a bunch of stuff into a bond proposal. We haven't. We've talked about two components. Jenny?
I just want to go back in history for a minute. The conversation about Edison was well thought out when it was placed on the table, and it was compared to, the opportunity was looked at for all possible fields in the district, and there are many components that go into that. The size that it accommodates, the size that lane accommodates, parking, centrality of location. Tamaqua does not, as many schools don't provide a real good spectator parking opportunity. Edison, in addition, the opportunity was that Edison is a field that's not currently used to its maximum. It doesn't have a local varsity sport home, and it would provide additional extra field use as opposed to turfing for multiple uses of a field that's already has a home for a varsity sport.
Right, all I'm reacting to is, I don't really know anything about fields, but last week the price tag was 1.5 million. And this week, everything Mark says makes sense. I mean, I'm not sure why you would turf half a field, but it doesn't make sense to me. But I'm just saying, it's, the price tag's going up is all I'm remarking on. That's all I'm saying.
If there's still a question from Ginny's point of view, I think that the picture that you've got in your hand, the field down here, which is the JV field, the left field area, at least as the way it's shown here, half of that field would be turf and half of it would still be grass.
Well, the original analysis didn't show that that would be the case, so I don't know why it's drawn in this manner. The original analysis was that there would be a field that would fit in the middle. I wasn't aware that there would be overlap. I thought I knew that it was capable of
And I don't know
fitting in
what the
middle.
old one said,
No,
so
that was
can't compare.
always, that was always the case,
Was it?
which is why we're looking at moving the JV field back. But I don't think you'll ever get it back far enough so you'll have no turf in the outfield.
I would suggest we have our turf consultant, turf specialist, or whatever here next week and answer any of these questions too, if that's possible, if we have one.
Yeah, oh, yeah, we do. Remember, he came to the last
Right,
meeting.
right.
Yeah, he's good, right.
Anyone else?
I would just add, I mean, just to Ann's point, it seems to me from a public perspective, well, from our perspective, the roofs are the number one priority, so I certainly wouldn't want to muddy any referendum that we put, I wouldn't want to complicate the issue by adding a whole bunch of stuff on it. I mean, if the roofs are our main priority, then it seems like, to the extent that we can keep the remainder, the additional issue, as simple as possible, would probably be better. It's just a thought.
And maybe there are ways to look at additional funding to tie into the turf field. I know when we had worked on Kaler Stadium, there was additional resources. We had to, bond for most of it, but then, as some pieces were added, there's other sources to consider. That field's used not just by our schools, but by rec departments, not just ours, but other communities as well, so. That might be something to consider as well.
All right.
So,
Anything else? Jane, report?
Nope.
Long-range planning. Jenny?
Long-range planning plans to meet Friday, March 23rd.
3:30? 3:30.
Yes.
All right. Policies, Roseanne.
I move that the board affirms the superintendent's decision on 12HS19 for the reasons set forth therein.
Second.
Discussion? Vince?
Ms. Kerstad?
Yes.
Mrs. Olig?
Yes.
Mr. Matesic?
Yes.
Ms. Carey?
Yes.
Mrs. Clancy?
yes.
Mr. Friedman?
Yes.
Mrs. Lights?
Yes.
Mr. Slater?
Yes.
Anything else?
Policy meets next Thursday night at 7:30.
Curriculum, instruction, and programs. Ann?
I would ask the board to approve for final reading the following curricula: mathematics, under mathematics, seminar in advanced mathematics, and approve for first reading the following curricula under fine arts, ceramics 2. May I have a second?
Second.
We've already discussed mathematics, but ceramics 2 is a new course that will be offered for the first time in September. It's an extension of ceramics 1, and it just basically the children progress with advanced technique in ceramics. Ceramics is very popular at the high school. We now run 10 sections of ceramics 1, and we'll be running 2 sections of ceramics 2. So the art department is very excited about this. Any questions? We'll vote, and then I have one other announcement.
If there's no questions?
Ms. Carey?
Yes.
Mr. Slater?
Yes.
Mr. Matesic?
Yes.
Mrs. Clancy?
Yes.
Mr. Friedman?
Yes.
Ms. Kerstad?
Yes.
Mrs. Lights?
Yes.
Mrs. Older?
Yes.
And the announcement is that for the first time in September, we will be offering Mandarin Chinese 1. It will be offered to students in grades 10, 11, and 12 who have developed some proficiency in another language. And I'm just going to read the course description. This introductory level course is intended for students in grades 10, 11, and 12 who have developed some proficiency in a language other than English and are looking to expand cultural and linguistic competence through the study of a non-European language. Mandarin Chinese 1 engages students in activities that promote fundamental communication skills through a thematic approach that incorporates typical informal settings and aspects of daily life. Emphasis is placed on developing interpretive listening and interpersonal speaking skills. Students in this course gain an important cultural perspective as they compare and contrast aspects of the Eastern Chinese culture with those of their own culture. And I would say that anyone hearing this who's interested in their child possibly taking this course should contact their guidance counselor because courses for next year are being scheduled, as most of us know, right now. It sounds like a very exciting course, and it's a pilot program, and hopefully we'll be able to continue with it in the next year. I don't know if you wanted to add anything. Was there anything else?
No, it's just, this is something we've been working towards for a number of years, actually, and we really are excited. We're going to be able to start it. We've been talking to districts who already have the program in their schools, and we've also been partnering with a few districts in order to make it possible for next year. So we've heard over the years an interest from the community and are very glad we're able to start this as a pilot. So.
And now can you read that in Mandarin?
No, but maybe I'll audit
Soon.
the course next year. I'd love
Soon.
to.
And just what was the thinking around why not ninth grade? First question.
We did ask Paul that question. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the answer though, Paul.
So maybe Mr. Panera, he'll come to the microphone.
We did talk, we did speak about that, and Mr. Greer, who's done a wonderful job putting together a survey for the feasibility of such a program, talked to counselors and some staff, and believe that in this first year it would make the most sense to pilot it at the 10th grade level. It could be a very significant challenge for an incoming 9th grader who has a lot on his or her plate, coming into a new high school with a lot of new challenges. It's a very big transition. If in the future it's determined that the transition isn't too difficult, it's possible that it could be offered, but Mr. Greer and I concur, felt very strongly that the best way to make sure that it was successful in his first year was to pilot it at the 10th grade level. And we do expect there to be a Mandarin Chinese 2 the following year for those students that are in the first year.
So that actually was going to be my next question. It's a pilot. Do we make clear to people taking the pilot that there may in fact not be Mandarin 2?
Yes, and the letter that there was a caveat of sorts suggesting that if it didn't run this year, there was a caveat that the staffing would be a possible concern, but it seems like that will be worked out, as Dr. Dolan said. Mr. Greer has a lot of ongoing conversation with other districts to partner up with that, so we think we have good prospects for that. But as far as the survey was concerned, there seems to be significant interest to make it run for the first year, and if that carries over into the second year, then we would be able to run a 2.
And the other districts, some of the other districts we spoke with, a few of them actually started as a pilot, and in each of the districts we've worked with, it has continued to grow. It hasn't been a problem to try to increase enrollment. There was a built-in interest, actually. And just to be clear also, it will be open next year for grades 10, 11, and 12, all 3 of those grades, students in any of those 3 grades.
When would we actually approve it?
Right now. I mean, we don't really actually vote on a pilot. Am I right about that? I mean, the curriculum committee discussed it, and we're recommending that we move forward with it. The actual letter, I
It's
believe,
already
has
been out.
already
The
been
guidance
out.
counselor's already talking to kids.
Because once we approved it on Thursday, we went, the district moved forward.
Exactly, because of just what you referenced before, right now, students are scheduling for next year, so we needed to get the information out. And yes, we could have waited another year, but honestly, we've been waiting a while, and so once we could see what was possible, we appreciate the fact that the curriculum committee of the board said, yes, you can go ahead with it, so.
Has there been immediate interest, or you don't know?
Yes, there has. The survey indicated very much interest. I don't have particular numbers off the top of my head, but I wouldn't want to hazard a guess, but I was very comfortable with Mr. Greer's extrapolation about what he thought or what the interest he thought would be for it.
I actually meant, since the letter went out, did anyone call trying to change their course selections, which were already in?
Yeah, there have been a number of follow-ups. In fact, there were follow-ups, well, yeah, immediately, the next day and since.
I just have one question. The fact that it's a pilot, so are there criterion already established that says, you know, if we do X, then it continues, and if we don't achieve X, it doesn't continue? Or is it based upon how many kids are interested and things like that?
I think it's the overall experience. I mean, first we have to fill a section, right? I mean, if we don't fill a section, obviously, we're not going forward. So we have to do that, and then I guess it would be based on the experience. I mean, everything that we've piloted since I've been here has moved forward, so.
I think as far as I can remember, that's true also.
I just wonder if, you know, if you did have a section, for example,
Right.
and a lot of kids were interested, and there was not some predetermined metric or something that was quantifiable that says if we don't achieve X, we're not going to go forward. I mean, it just seems like it leaves it leaves some flexibility for sure, but it also leaves some question that we didn't say up front what the requirements were to have it no longer be a pilot and move it to the mainstream.
Well, I mean, one thing I would say is we don't run a course unless it has 15 kids. So if we ran it one year, if we had enough to run it this coming year, but let's say there weren't 15 students interested the next year, the course wouldn't run, whether it was a pilot or a regular.
So we haven't
regular.
hired a Mandarin teacher then until we know how many students, or do you already have one ready?
There are some prospects that Mr. Greer is looking into, but
Okay.
we don't know the sections
Sure.
yet. That would
Okay.
play into it.
And again, working with a few other districts also to see if that's a possibility.
Okay.
So we do have some leads, but no, we haven't hired.
I was going to say that it was also discussed in the curriculum committee that while we're starting in the high school and we're piloting it at 10th, 11th, and 12th, that's not to say that it won't be explored, that it might start earlier. If we find that the pilot in the high school is extremely successful and becomes a very vibrant and robust course or curricula for people to go through the grades, it may in fact go down as well. Be offered in the intermediate schools or even the elementary schools, but that is down the line, but possibly. You gotta start somewhere.
Yep.
So this is where we're starting.
Right, exactly.
Anyone else? Anything else, Aaron?
No, that's it. Thank you.
All right, I would move to finance and ask the board consider finance motions 1 through 4. 4 is an addendum that was at your seats and reads, approve submission of application for Race to the Top Phase 3 grant in the amount of $13,096. Have a second?
Second.
Peg, do you want to explain number 4?
Yes, Race to the Top is a federal program. New Jersey was recently a state that received some funding from the federal government, and New Jersey then determined that the District of Westfield will be able to have an allocation up to $13,096. The Race to the Top has some very specific objectives that you can use the money for. One of the objectives we found fit exactly with work we're doing with our teachers. That objective is to provide professional development for teachers to support the fact that we are now working with new Common Core standards, which signify a shift in some philosophy about what needs to be taught at every level. There's a lot of work to make sure that teachers do understand those shifts. So what we are proposing, this is an application to use the money, and so the application going to the state asks that we be able to use that money to provide that professional development and support for the teachers. And this grant is over a period of 3 years, but that's the total amount that we're allocated at this point from the state.
Any questions or comments on the motion? Vince?
Mr. Matesic?
Yes.
Mr. Friedman?
Yes.
Ms. Carey?
Yes.
Mrs. Clancy?
Yes.
Ms. Krostak?
Yes.
Mrs. Lights?
Yes.
Mr. Slater?
Yes.
Mrs. Oley?
Yes.
I'd ask the board to note the notes for the record, and with that, move into legislation. Yeah.
Since we did have so many issues scheduling our meeting, I just want to say that it is Thursday, March 29th at 2 p.m., and we will be discussing the 10-year reform bill. We will be discussing ways to give feedback to Trenton about the anti-bullying bill and how that's affected the district. And we'll be discussing, as I referenced before, a letter or some sort of communication to Senator Keene and the assemblymen and women on the bond issue, on the construction issue, and going back down to Trenton and trying to get us some help there. So those are our 3 issues.
Unfinished business. New business. All right, ad hoc committee reports.
Technology Committee will be meeting in 12 hours or so to continue our, actually less, to continue our work and talk a little bit more about a number of the issues that came up tonight having to do with technology as well.
Great. Any other ad hoc committee reports? Liaison reports. Roseanne.
I attended the Roosevelt PTSO meeting today, and there was lots of discussion about how they were going to spend the funds that they have raised, and the technology that was needed at Roosevelt, and also how that would be aligned with the work that the board and the district will be doing and supporting them as they move forward. So they are anxious to spend their money, so the sooner we get them the information of what we'll be supplying in the near future, they would greatly appreciate that.
Terrific. Ginny. Oh.
I attended the McKinley PTO general meeting last week. That's all.
All right, anyone else? At this point, I would recognize the public for questions and/or comments. Seeing no one, I would ask that the board approve the following resolutions. Resolve that the Board of Education move into private session for the purposes of discussing personnel, litigation, or negotiations, and being further resolved that any discussion held by the board which need not remain confidential, and the results of the discussion will be made public as soon as practicable. Have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So carried. We're adjourned.